Again, Mehta and Mehta new initiative. Of course, it is Mehta and Mehta Insolvency and Restructuring LLP of the group of Mehta and Mehta group. And this is third, I will say third session, and first two sessions were on the code of conduct. This we are taking on voluntary liquidation. I like the suggestion from the participants, what you want to do. We can discuss on the case laws also. We can discuss on the various sections also. It depends what everyone wants, but I like to have your suggestion also. And we will have this, as I declared earlier, bi-monthly, this insolvency webinar regularly. And I'll request everyone to share their query online, and they can also unmute and raise the question at that time only. No need to wait to end the webinar. And also, if you have to share any experience, you are most welcome. It's an informal discussion among friends only. We all are equal. We learn every day, and I'll appreciate that. Stating that today's topic is voluntary liquidation under IBC. We as a company secretary was also and a chartered accountant, all that. We were dealing with the voluntary liquidation earlier under the Companies Act. And at that time, there was no requirement of having the insolvency professional. Even the officer of the company was also allowed to be liquidator, even a director. And from that, today's situation of IBC and voluntary liquidation is also covered under Insolvency Bankruptcy Code. We have covered entire gamut of it, and in that, in between, we are doing to give you hint on the practical aspect, because I'll share my experience. There are participants who have gone through the voluntary liquidation, who are going through that. They can also share that experience as such. So we have with our guest, Mr. Vaibhavkumar, is director of the Bobby Parikh and Associates. To give brief introduction, with over 10 years of experience in tax advisory and consultancy, Vaibhav specializes in transaction-specific tax advisory services with specific focus on real estate, infrastructure, and financial service industries. Over the years, Vaibhav has advised a number of developers, private equity investor, NBFC, AIF, on diverse aspects such as evaluation of funding options, strategies for tax optimization, profit repatriation, corporate reorganization, SEZ, and mergers and acquisitions. Vaibhav also has a considerable experience in a wide range of domestic and international tax assignments covering comprehensive services and solutions in conceptualizing, structuring, and executing inbound investment and cross-border transaction from an Indian tax and regulatory perspective. Vaibhav is a graduate in commerce from University of Mumbai and qualified as a chartered accountant in 2011. Welcome, Mr. Vaibhav, and we will like to have a share of your experience on the taxation aspect. For participants' knowledge, Mr. Vaibhav is involved in the big group having presence over different countries for that closer liquidation, and that's why his experience will be very worth to be known to the participants. Welcome, Mr. Vaibhav.
Thank you.
And, if you like to say a few words on the topic, I'll request you if you want to share some view on the topic as such.
Thanks, Dipti. So the only experience I mean, as we progress on the slide deck, which we'll be presenting, we will touch upon the relevant points at that relevant moment. And I'm requesting all the participants, whenever they have any questions from a tax perspective or from a practical aspect, happy to have all those questions. I'll try and answer whatever questions I can answer, and if there are any questions which require some more research, I will come back. I'll share my views with Dipti, and later on we can circulate that response to all the participants.
Sure. Mr. Umesh, you can start your presentation, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Today we are decoding the voluntary liquidation under the IBC. So today we are talking about the voluntary liquidation. So we'll start. So first of all, the introduction. Firstly, the liquidation is the last resort for the company. Before that, the company consider the various aspects to restruct themselves under the authority of law. So there is a strategy to review if the company fails in strategies. So they go into the liquidation. That is a final option available to the company. The concept of this liquidation is introduced in the Companies Act 1956 under section 484. Thereafter, it found itself in the Companies Act section 270 of Companies Act 2013. So in the previous act, the section 304 and 325 of the Companies Act, the detailed provisions of voluntary liquidation, but that provisions are not notified still yet. Then after the IBC code come into effect, and it scribbled out the Companies Act provisions regarding the voluntary liquidation, and it come up with the section 59 of the code along with the voluntary liquidation regulations, which come into the effect from 1st April 2017. These are the basic introduction of the voluntary liquidation before the code and after the introduction of the code. Now the provisions which are dealing with the voluntary liquidation is the IBC code. First of all, there is a one section, section 59, the single section which covers the whole voluntary liquidation process, and the IBBI voluntary liquidation process regulations. So in detail regulations is also there along with the section. So there is a liquidation process under the code. The section 35 to 53 of the chapter 3 and chapter 7 of code is applicable to the voluntary liquidation as well. So basically this section 35 to 53, these sections are applicable to liquidation under the code. The same sections will applicable to the voluntary liquidation as well, with certain modifications whenever there is required. So these are the basic sections which are applicable. Now the Companies Act, we'll do the comparison of the voluntary liquidation under the Companies Act 1956 and the IBC code. So we'll talk about the more modes of winding up. In Companies Act, there is a differentiate between the members voluntary winding up and the creditors voluntary winding up. So there is an option, so members can voluntarily go for the winding up, or creditors can take initiative and they can go for the voluntary winding up. But in IBC, there is no such a differentiation. There is only a company, we can say the corporate person can move into the voluntary winding up by passing a special resolution. And the appointment of liquidator, in Companies Act 1956, there is no such a profession or professional. Only the official liquidator who is under administration of the High Court of that state will act as a liquidator for that company. But in IBC, there is only an insolvency professional. He can appoint as a liquidator under the voluntary liquidation. So there is eligibility to be an insolvency professional or to act as a liquidator for the corporate person. So that will cover in next slides. Third part is adjudicating authority. Here is in Companies Act, the High Court is adjudicating authority, will take into the account of the voluntary liquidations. And in IBC, we have a quasi-judicial, that is NCLT. So these are the basic differentiation between the Companies Act 1956 and IBC code. Am I audible to all?
Yeah. Umesh, you can go.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Now, who can be initiate the voluntary liquidation process? So the corporate person himself, here he can only himself go for the liquidation. So there are certain things which has to take into consideration before moving into the voluntary liquidation. The first thing, that they have not committed any default of any of his debt. Debt means we can take as a financial debt and operational debt as well. Or there is no such a debt, or they are able to pay the debt in full of the proceeds of the assets which is sold into the liquidation. So we can say that the corporate person is enough cash rich company, or he have enough liquidity to pay his debts. So that is a primary thing to go into the voluntary liquidation. So they can initiate the under section 59. So these are the basic condition. And the second, now who can be the liquidator? So the eligibility for appointment of liquidator is, the first and prima facie is he must be independent to the corporate person. He is eligible to be appointed as an independent director of that company. So we can say there is no pecuniary or any other relationship with the corporate person. The liquidator must be independent himself and is not a related party to the corporate person. Third thing, he should not be an employee or proprietor of that firm in previous 3 financial years. Firms like a audit firm, secretarial firm, cost audit firm, or a legal consulting firm which earns more than the 10% of gross turnover of that firm. And the liquidator shall disclose if there is any pecuniary or any personal relationship arise before or after his appointment, that should be informed to the board and the adjudicating authority. So we can say the liquidator should be independent to the corporate person. Or one thing we should add here, that if the insolvency professional is a member of the director or a partner of the entity in which any other resolution professional represent any of the person in the corporate person, then he should be intimate this to the board and register NCLT. Third, next is procedure of voluntary liquidation. So we are covering the detailed procedure for the voluntary liquidation. So first, it starts with the declaration of solvency. Declaration of solvency, we can say it is the heart of this whole chapter of section 59 of the company's IBC, which is a duly verified by the affidavit by majority of directors. So say if there is a 6 directors in the company, then at least 4 directors should be given the declaration of solvency on a stamp paper. If any director or a majority of directors are a foreign country, they are residing in the foreign country, then that should be a notarized and apostille. And that declaration of solvency should be verified by an affidavit stating that they made a full inquiry into the affairs of the company, on the basis of which they are concluding that company has a no debt. As on date, the company has a no debt, or they are able to pay the debts in the full from the proceeds of the assets which are to be sold in the voluntary liquidation. And the second thing, the company is not being liquidated to defraud any person. So these 2 things should be a affidavit by the majority directors. So it all starts with the declaration of solvency.
So I just want to add one point on this slide, which Umesh mentioned, that there is an affidavit which needs to be provided by the by the majority of directors. So from a practical standpoint, when company goes into voluntary liquidation, normally what we suggest our client is that if before a relevant board resolutions are passed for proceeding ahead with the voluntary liquidation, to the extent if debts, if company has any debt or company has any creditors, if to the extent we are able to clean them up, that helps in overall process. So practically, if if there are surplus in the company which can be utilized to pay off the debt, pay off the creditors in the company, then all these declaration makes is far easier for directors to certify and take the overall process forward.
Okay, thank you, Umesh. Umesh, carry on.
The affidavit, it should be accompanied by the audited financial statements of previous past 2 years. If the company is incorporated latestly, then whichever is later. Second thing, the records of the business operations. So the records of business operations, what exactly it means, does it not defined in the regulations actually. Third thing, report by the registered valuers if there is any. So third one is optional. So normally it is based on the audited financial statements, which shows the enough assets to pay their debts.
1 minute. Here, when we say the valuer, valuation report optional, but as a good practice to avoid any litigation, if there is assets, better you take valuation, because when IP sell it, on what ground selling it? What is the base price? So that time, even though it is optional, better you take that. And also, when if there is assets, that valuation will help the director to decide on the worth of the company, that realization of assets. On what basis the director is giving that affidavit. And as we move, again, we will give comment on the process. Yeah, Umesh, go ahead.
Okay, ma'am. Now, after the declaration.
Umesh, 1 minute. There is a question, records of business operation means any interpretation. As on today, they have not mentioned about records of business in, operations. So we are attaching financial statements only as on today, and the same is accepted. Additional information we are not giving.
Okay, ma'am.
And I guess there is one question on capital gains.
But I thought that, we have just started the process and the sale of assets reached. So I thought that we'll comment. Right. That's why even that earlier timeline, let me comment, Ms. Preeti, when the timeline starts. Both the question will take it that time. So otherwise it will interrupt our process flow. Right. Yeah, please.
Okay, ma'am. So after the declaration of solvency given by the majority of directors, the second thing we see in the process is the company have to convey the board meeting to discuss and approve the following resolutions. Firstly, the voluntary winding up company, that is a subject to the approval of the members by passing a special resolution in next AGM or EOGM. And the second resolution is appointment of liquidator and fixing their remuneration. It is also a subject to the approval by the members. And third thing is consider and approve the declaration of solvency, which is given by the majority of directors. And to convey the next general meeting, members meeting, to fix a date, time, venue, and to prepare a notices and agenda, along with the explanatory statement stating the reasons for the moving into the voluntary liquidation. That should be there in the explanatory statement, so that these things are to be covered and approved by the board members. So explanatory statement, we can say that there are certain things for which company move into the voluntary liquidation. First, we can say the object of the company is accomplished. So that can be one reason. And the second thing, if there is an occurrences of any event in the principal documents of the company and that event is got triggered, so that is also one reason. And we can say the competition, stiff competition in the market. So these are things comes under the reasons for the voluntary liquidation.
There is a question in the chat box that liquidator will be appointed by board members or from NCLT bench member. Liquidator will be proposed by the board and will be appointed by the members in the members meeting. NCLT will come in last only at the time of filing dissolution application in voluntary liquidation. In voluntary liquidation, commencement happens with the company and insolvency professional. The judiciary, that is NCLT, comes adjudicating authority at the end only. I hope I clarified. Thanks. Umesh, go ahead.
Okay. Now we have done with the board meeting. Now next is to have a special resolution by passing by the members. So as per section 59(3) of the code, that should be got within the 4 weeks of the declaration. So when we got the declaration of solvency by the majority of directors, then we have to go for a special resolution. The resolution passed by the majority of partners or contributories, as the case may be, to first of all to liquidate the company along with the appointment of insolvency professional to act as a liquidator and fixing his remuneration so that there is no ambiguity. The resolution by the partners and members that require a corporate person to be liquidated. The result of the expiry of the period of his duration, as we talked earlier, the duration of companies expired, or but which is fixed by any constitutional document of that company or occurrences of any event as per their constitutional documents. So these things are covered to trigger into the voluntary winding up and to appoint as a liquidator, IP as a liquidator. Apart from this, if company have any debt means it's financial and as operational debt as well. If company has owes any debt from any person, that creditors representing 2/3 in the value of the debt of that corporate person, that shall be approved by passing a resolution within the 7 days of such resolution. So within 7 days, we have to take their approval or NOC from the creditors. Now, the intimation by the company to the
1 minute. Umesh, go to earlier slide, please. Okay. Now, if you see, there is a question is if shareholder is a listed body corporate, then is it required to pass special resolution by shareholder? See, in the sense, the shareholder, the company which is going for voluntary liquidation has to pass special resolution. The shareholder of a listed body corporate, I am not getting your question. The special resolution has to be passed by a company which wants to go itself into voluntary liquidation. Whether it is listed or unlisted, anyway. Okay. Now, friends, if you see that and one point will come later, that what is the liquidation commencement date, voluntary liquidation commencement date. That is when the members' resolution is passed. And from that date, insolvency professional is appointed, process start. But if you see that it is subject to the approval of creditors, even the resolution has to say. So 2/3 in value of debt. Now practically imagine you pass the resolution within 7 days, you go to these creditors. And if they don't approve, how you will do it? There is decided case on that aspect, which Umesh will take later on. But I'm putting it at a right place. So practically, as our panelists said that, we always take creditors before you initiate the process, because you will have a board meeting, you will have a general meeting, and then you will go to creditors, then it's going to have a problem. And that's why it is always advisable for take the creditor's consent or pay them in advance so that you are sure that they are with you.
And ma'am,
yeah,
we can pay the debt if company wants to.
yeah, the same thing if they want it. Please note that shareholders also special resolution, there will be dissenting shareholders, but still you can go ahead. Same way there is a creditors who will be dissenting, but still you can go ahead, but you have to pay all creditors. That is clear. Okay. So what happens? It is the consent to initiate. That doesn't mean that dissenting creditors will not be paid or as such. Before dissolution, you have to pay every creditors. It's only consent to start the process. So there can be creditors who will not give you the consent. So in that scenario, you should ensure 2/3 are there. Unnecessary objection can be avoided. That's why it is suggested. There is a clarification. The company which is going for liquidation, who has listed body corporate as a shareholder, then that body corporate needs to pass. See, that body corporate will be governed by Companies Act, that voting power. How a company give voting power, exercises voting power, that you will be governed by the section. This liquidation will not be governing that company. Only this requirement is for the company which is going for liquidation. If one of the shareholder is company, then they have to act as per Companies Act, whereby company exercises voting rights by delegating to board, or board give it to some of the representative with direction. So that representative will attend the meeting and vote for and behalf of that company. It is not special resolution for special resolution for voluntary liquidation. Okay, thank you. Yeah, Umesh, go ahead.
Now, the intimation by the company to the registrar of companies as per the code. Intimation to ROC we have to given within the 7 days of the approval of liquidation of that company. That is subsequent to approval by the 2/3 of the value date of the company. So there is a certain forms which we require to file within the 7 days of the voluntary liquidation commencement date. That first one is the MGT 14 for the resolution that are passed for this voluntary liquidation and appointment of the liquidator. Then the second one is JNL 2 for the declaration of solvency along with the affidavit that should be filed with the form JNL 2 within the 7 days of the approval of the voluntary liquidation by the members. Now, second one, we have to intimate to the IBBI in the prescribed form after the passing the resolution for the liquidation of the company, which is subject to the approval by the 2/3 of the value of the debt of the company. Now the public announcement.
Just a minute. That as regards affidavit, I'll request friends all be careful and study the balance sheet. The director should be careful. The company secretary has to ensure that board do not give in hurry any resolution. They should be able to do, because it's supported by affidavit. It can be question of misrepresentation and wrong. Many things will come up as a non-compliance. So one has to be very careful. Okay, and there is a question that if a company has went into voluntary liquidation and the company is 1956, approximately 30 years before, I don't know. My dear Miss Silpi, can you say that it's a reality? I will put it that way, just to set aside. I have my own voluntary liquidation also before under 1956, and even after IBC it continues under 1956 with liquidator office. Through liquidator office represent before the High Court, and High Court give the order. It will continue under that. I myself has completed through voluntary liquidation under the Companies Act even after IBC. Okay, thanks. Umesh, go ahead.
Public announcement. After the appointment of the liquidator, the liquidator shall make a public announcement in prescribed form, that is a form B as per schedule 2, within the 5 days of his appointment. The public announcement shall, it is actually an invitation for the stakeholders to submit their claims as on the liquidation commencement date. So basically this form is for that, to file a claims with the liquidator. And it provides the certain details in that form, like the SIN, company name, name of the liquidator, his address, phone number, and other things. And we provide the last date for submission of claim, which shall be the 30 days from the liquidation commencement date. That announcement shall be published, first of all, in one English language and one regional language newspaper. It should be circulated to the where the registered office of the company and the principal office, if any company have a principal office of the corporate debtor, and any other location where the opinion of the liquidator that we should be where the material corporate person conducts the material business operations. So newspaper advertisement should be there in form B, and on the website of the corporate debtor, if any. Third one, on the website where the board says for this purpose. So this public announcement should be made within the 5 days of the commencement of the voluntary liquidation. Now the opening of the bank account. The liquidator has to open the bank account.
Umesh, 1 minute. Just as regards public announcement, friends, if it is observed, it is mentioned, it is to be given. Umesh, where it, which particular area we have to say, it's location of the registered office and principal office of the corporate debtor, where in the opinion of liquidator, the corporate person conduct material business operation. So accordingly, please ensure that if there is a material business operation, you give that. It is advisable, because you may get later on the claim and you are not knowing, then it create an issue. So give the newspaper advertisement wherever it is required. Thank you, even though it is optional. Thank you, Umesh. Go ahead.
Opening of bank account. Now the liquidator has to open the bank account in the name of the corporate person, followed by the words involuntary liquidation in a scheduled bank, for all the receipts of the money to the corporate debtor, which are to be realized by the sale of assets in the liquidation period, and all the payments in that period which are more than 5,000 rupees, that shall be drawn by check or online banking transactions from that account only. So say if the company come into the voluntary liquidation and the company have some 2 or 3, for example, 3 current accounts, so the payments should not be made from that current account. It should be from the voluntary liquidation account, which is opened by the liquidator, should be come from this account only. And for that accounts, we should close it, and the surplus amount should be deposited into this account. All the transactions should be done from voluntary liquidation account, which are opened by the liquidator for this specific purpose. Now next is intimations. Intimation to the various statutory authorities. We have to intimate the authorities of this voluntary winding up of the company. Authorities like a PF, ESIC, income tax, and GST, RBI, whatever laws applicable to the corporate person. With respect to the income tax and GST, the process of applying initially before commencement, before 15th November, when the IBBI issued the circular stating that the NOC is not required from the income tax authorities. Before that, the practice was made to get the NOC from income tax authorities stating that no dues from the corporate person, or we have no objections. Then after the circular was issued by the IBBI, which stated that the NOC or NDC, that is no objection or no due certificate from the income tax department, it takes a substantial time, and it mitigate the process of the code and defeat the object and the time-bound process. So the IBBI said that no objection certificate is no more required from the income tax department. If the income tax authority does not file the claim within the 30 days, then their claim will be extinguished as per the code and regulations made there.
Here, actually earlier we used to face a lot of issue to get income tax NOC because there was no lot of delay obtaining that said from the income tax offices, and the process was delayed, and that's why it is mentioned that this came out. Further, if you observe PF, ESI, income tax, now wherever the company has registered, please intimate them, because practically we are faced. The PF office will come to you and they have their issue. So if you have not handled it, it may be tribal, amount may be tribal, then there will be problem. ESI also same way, though it is not mentioned anywhere, but you have to do this. So you ask the company wherever you have obtained registration or you have license, including like SOP and establishment. Because please note that after your liquidation and dissolution, you have to surrender all license and close the chapter. So at that time, you will be questioned. So all the license, all registration, you have to inform. You inform that this company by its resolution have decided voluntary liquidation, I am appointed, and if you have any claim, please file us. Like everything. Yeah, DGFT also, Amita, because if there is an export obligation, you don't know many times the clients are sharing the details. So you have to ask that whether you had imported machinery, is there any export obligation? So you have to write that if there is an import-export obligation or like that way, write to DGFT also, so that it can be worked out. So that's why, yeah. Hello?
Yes, ma'am. I'm going to finish.
Yeah. So that is that, and I think Mr. Ashish Singh has joined or not. I wanted him to share his recent experience. Meanwhile, if somebody else who wants to say, please say that.
I just want to add on what Dipti madam mentioned with regard to income tax. So yes, prior to 21, when IBC came in with a circular where they mentioned that no more the liquidator should not be waiting for the NOC or should not be asking for the NOC. Prior to that, income tax had put an obligation on the liquidator to wait for a period of 90 days. So there's a section 178 of the Income Tax Act which deals with the obligation on the part of liquidator to intimate the income tax and wait for 90 days post intimation for income tax authorities to provide if there are any dues or if they want any amount to be set aside for dealing with any litigation, then liquidator was under an obligation to wait for the details to come or NOC to come from the tax authorities. Just want to add on that prior to 21 also, although section 178 was amended in 2016 to mention that IBC code will override section 178, but income tax authorities, banks, all these people used to expect NOC from income tax before proceeding with payment of surplus cash to the stakeholders. But this 2021 circular from IBC is a welcome one, which at least strengthen the position that IBC code overrides the section 178. And certainly since then, it has helped in expediting the process, because at least in our experience, the maximum time which any authority used to take was the tax authority. The other point I just want to touch upon at this juncture is, as I mentioned earlier, before we press the button for proceeding ahead with the voluntary liquidation, it is always good to ensure that all the tax authorities and all the authorities mentioned on the screen. We should try and see if there are any pending litigation, any pending dues, all those gets cleared before we commence the process. Otherwise, all those add to the overall complete timeline which we have. And although earlier tax authorities used to wait for the liquidator to approach them for them to get the NOC, now tax authorities in our experience have been given a mandate that whenever any notice comes, they need to respond on time. Therefore, it is always good to ensure that either there are no litigation, or if something is reflecting on the portal of any of the tax authorities, come GST, come income tax, or any other authorities, try and get resolve them before you initiate the process. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. The same, there was a question that if there is any refund pending as such, see, you will not able to close the company and complete the process unless all the litigation, all appeal, not a single appeal, even your application, your appeal will not be pending. You have to withdraw, because once resolution is there, who will appear there? So you can't leave it pending. So that's why any litigation, any appeal, any refund, or whatever you say, either you waive off or wait. But one thing is that it is practical suggestion and advice. So far possible, your client should be advised, no litigation, no application, no appeal, no refund. It is better way. Because if this process is on, see, you have intimated all departments. They'll start checking their own record. And even though there is nothing, they'll start inquiry, query, and all that. So it's most dangerous you open it for more time, then the process get delayed. So that's why so far possible, there is a question on DD before taking assignment in view of the timeline, because now it is the timeline is pressurized. So I will just say DD, otherwise overall also. So far possible now, recent amendment timelines, which is also included in this PPT, that timeline is reduced so that voluntary liquidation happens fast. It is saying that timeline is for distribution and closure of voluntary liquidation. It's very limited, very short. So if you say sale of assets, you have very limited time. And actually speaking, if that sale of assets, what kind of assets, what kind of purchaser, what can be the price, that all should be studied in advance, and any time before DD means you study the balance sheet. The kind of business, you have to understand the business of the company, kind of registration, what all we are telling that, we have to do this, and we are giving the additional inputs that this should be done first. Like you check creditors, and if possible, better pay rather than waiting for that consent. And you have drafts for voluntary liquidation. Okay, let's say. As regards assets, it should be not that tribal small different variety of assets. Please dispose it of earlier. Then if there is litigation, don't start the process. It will unnecessarily carry on. No? Please attend the litigation. One thing keep in mind also, in litigation, if there is a settlement, liquidator has as a legal position as a limited rights. But as a promoter, they have very different right. So please sort this out and then start liquidation. So I always advise my client that way, and you also advise your client, please don't keep all this pending duty as such. Liquidator has limited and a very restricted, decided mode and path to do this all action. And it increases the cost of the company, complications, timeline, and that's why it is advisable. The major thing is creditors, assets, litigation. If not, you can achieve your timeline. That was the advice of DT or anything for taking assignment before, Ms. Preeti. That was my suggestion. Okay. And your question as regards timeline, whether it is bound to the liquidation, voluntary liquidation. See, voluntary liquidation already started, and then you can't comply the timeline. Anything, it should be always prospective implication. If it is retrospective, then the amendment says it is applicable retrospective. But so far possible, if you have that flexibility, to complete that timeline, which is amended when your voluntary liquidation is still going on, achieve it. You should try to close the process as early as possible. That's all. So it is prospective, not retrospective application. I hope I have clarified. Thanks. Yeah, we have Mr. Ashish. Ashish,
Yeah.
yeah, please share your, he had interesting inputs on the NOC. Yes, Mr. Ashish.
Yes. As usual, ma'am, my client briefed me for a assignment for the voluntary liquidation that the company is a non-operating company from last 2 years. And they said that there are no employees in the company, and this voluntary liquidation process was commenced on the 5th August 2020. Then after I intimated to all the statutory authorities that this process of the voluntary liquidation has been commenced, and if you have any dues, you can file your claim. Then I received a letter from the PF department that there are some dues from the PF department, and they want to do the audit and investigation of for the PF. So they asked for various documents, and then I contacted the corporate debtor, and I had taken all these documents and submitted with the PF department. After the long follow-up with the PF department for 6 months, they issued with a letter that they are giving the NOC, that they don't have any objection for filing the dissolution application, subject to that their dues of some amount, which is pending from last some years, is pending, and I have to pay that amount. Then I had taken the consent of the suspended directors, and I had paid that amount from my own pocket. That become the liquidation expenses, and then I get this NOC from the PF department. Then I was briefed while taking this assignment that there was some case pending with the Punjab and Haryana High Court for the refund of some duty. This is the STP unit. There was a STP unit that they had to claim some refund from the GST department. This litigation with the High Court is pending from last 1 year. So I asked them to withdraw this application. They said that, sir, this amount will come. But after some time, I received a letter from the GST department notice that there's some, we had refunded some amount by mistake, and they demanded for this 5 lakh something amount from me. Then they asked for some documents. Then they again issued a letter that they also want to conduct this investigation, audit and investigation for this GST thing. So they asked for various documents. Then I briefed them that this company is into dissolution, and this is not possible to get all the documents in the last 5-6 years. So they cancelled this notice for the audit. And then when I asked for the NOC from the GST department, after the time lag of corresponding follow-up and everything, after 1 year, they had issued me NOC saying that they don't have no dues from the company, but they are seeking a refund of some 5 lakh rupees, what they had demanded earlier, and that they want to file an appeal against this 5 lakh rupees. But as per me, since that they had already issued this NOC as on current date, therefore I can file this application, dissolution application, because as on date there is no dues, and they are contemplating to file this appeal before the authorities. And I think I should take my chance with the NCLT for the dissolution order. This is my case now.
Thanks, Mr. Ashish. Friends, I was telling, see the kind of complications comes. So the process, Ms. Preeti, the process is less, is good. We have to do it. And the DD is that all litigation, in this case also, if you observe, Mr. Ashish advised, but client did not withdraw. And how it bounces on IP and how it is difficult to handle. That's why it is to be suggested. And this way, the peculiarity they given NOC with the caveat. Now, whether it is NOC or not, you can't say. So now this is good thing that no NOC, but this I specially asked Mr. Assis that you share your experience for the benefit of all the participants. Thank you, Mr. Assis.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Umesh, please go ahead.
Thank you. This next thing is a preliminary report.
Sorry, Umesh, there is a, Amita, there is a comment from you. NOC of IT is required for closing gratuity trust. This extend timeline. Can you elaborate, Amita, please?
Yeah, in one of our case, no, there was a gratuity fund for the company, and I saw that all the trust audited documents are also submitted. I thought it must be a simple process to just get the NOC, but it is a long process, and still I'm struggling to get the NOC and closing the gratuity trust. That's an issue. So I think when you do that, factor some timeline for that. Start the process early. I think that's it. Thanks.
On this, any comment from anyone as regards gratuity trust? Okay. Okay, go ahead, Umesh.
Ma'am, in NOC, income tax circular, which stated that the applicability of the filing of the GST or returns during the liquidation period that should be continued by the liquidator. I think Vaibhav sir is, we can check from Vaibhav sir.
Mr. Vaibhav.
Okay, so Umesh, see, from an income tax perspective, income tax does warrant a return to be filed, and in the income tax return there is a special mention of details which is required if for the company which are in liquidation. And in this case, this is different for details which is being provided in the income tax return, unlike in normal scenario where you are required to provide asset, liabilities, your income, and other details. But when companies are under liquidation, the details which is sought is what are the total proceeds, what was the opening cash balance, what is the proceeds you had, what is the total total payment you did. All those details are required for the financial year company under liquidation until you complete the process of payment of all the assets and liabilities to the stakeholders. So that's on the income tax point. With regard to GST point, practically what we suggest our client is that once you start the liquidation process, you'll not have any operation. However, whenever we intimate the GST department with regard to the commencement of liquidation process, you are required to get the GST license surrender. Now, from the intimation process until surrender of license, as Dipti ma'am mentioned, there are various questioning which happens from the department. Various they will be asking for all the records, all the tax returns you have filed. So it does take time from the date you intimate and the time you get the license surrender. Although you do not have any business operations, it is always advisable to file the GST returns, which will be nil return, because in today's time, if you fail to file any GST return on time, you get a notice of paying a fees for delay in filing. So it is always advisable to file it on time, showing nil return until your GST license is surrendered. Thank you.
Thank you. There is a question as regards bank account. Yes, bank account has to be open and it's to be named specifically under voluntary liquidation. There is a question as regards what is the advantage of doing voluntary liquidation rather than IBC. Please note that voluntary liquidation is under IBC only, Insolvency Bankruptcy Code. Okay, and there is a question. I have filed a final report with NCLT. Let's reach to final report, please. We are in the process of in between. We have not yet reached the sale of assets also. Yeah, can a company initiate voluntary liquidation pending civil suit in respect of fixed asset which is not possible to dispose of? The company has won the suit at the level of trial court, but defendant has challenged the verdict in the High Court. See, there is nowhere it is written when the litigation is pending. No, you can't. But the process, what I am telling is, that what is the point when you cannot sell it? What is this point? This process will carry on for years and years. So please don't start that process, no? I will put two way. How you decide the cost, because what will happen now, IP will be appointed, he will be responsible for all the compliances. Again, two way. Company also lose the control in the sense decisive power. So if there is some adjustment required, they can't do because IP is not allowed to do. IP is only doing. So far possible, that only I was mentioning, that pending litigation, please don't initiate any voluntary liquidation. If you have to take any call, you can take as a promoter, but if as a liquidator, you can't. You are governed by the law. So that's why it is advisable. Okay? Yeah, Umesh, go ahead.
Ma'am, I have one question regarding the if the company comes into the voluntary liquidation and the business of the company got seized from the date of voluntary liquidation, but the provision says stated that the company can run the business for the beneficial interest of the stakeholders. So the what will be the tax aspects in if the company runs some 3 months business, we can say, for the beneficial interest of the stakeholders. So
it can be, you know, what happens that you will not take new business, but there can be commitment. So if there is a completion required for that purpose, you have to complete some activity that you can complete, and whatever tax implication you have to bear it, and you have to do. As our panelist has mentioned, that you have to file the return, you have to comply with all compliance need to be done. Yes, you might be telling about TDS, which is recent judgment. But we will complicate here, Umesh, if we add this, because you are not bound to pay TDS for the seller, that case, right, Umesh?
right, ma'am.
Yeah.
Payment of TDS on the sale of assets.
Yeah, no TDS is required on the sale of assets, because in liquidation, the company will not able to claim the same. That is the one of the decided case of NCLT.
Right, ma'am.
Yeah, but we don't have time. It's already 6 o'clock, so that's why. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, the next one is the preliminary report. The preliminary report is the first report which is prepared by the liquidator under the voluntary liquidation, and it has to be submitted within 45 days of the commencement of the liquidation to the management of the corporate person. The content of the report is basically the capital structure of the company and estimated assets, liabilities as on the date of liquidation as per the books of accounts of the company. The third one is he has to write a statement by the liquidator that he has to need any further inquiry into the matters relating to the formation or failure of the corporate debtor and conduct of the business. This statement has to be there by the liquidator. And third one is to propose the plan of action by the liquidator, how he carry the liquidation process and what will be the tentative timeline which has to be followed to carry out this liquidation. And the most important is the estimated liquidation cost. The liquidator has to mention the estimated cost, process cost, because as per section 53(1), that is distribution, that liquidation cost comes the primary part, then after only the balance amount is to be paid to the stakeholders.
There is a question that NOC exemption only to income tax department. It is basically earlier that was required NOC from income tax and you know, excise and all that. So that they have said that no exemption, no due certificate. The thing that now, please understand, only you have to intimate. Intimation is required. Why I mentioned that all other authorities, because you are required to cancel your registration if anything pending dues are there, and if the same is not paid, IP will be questioned what care you have taken. Like Mr. Assis was asked that, you know, there was a pending dues from PF authority. So if you send them, you come to know. So now no NOC. But the thing that you have to say that if you have any issue or if you have any claim, please file the same. What we write that please file the claim. Then they work out their own books and then say, oh, my dues are there or there. And we have to pay all dues. And that's why we have to intimate. Thanks. Umesh, please go.
Extortionate credit transactions. In voluntary liquidation as well, this aspect is covered. The transactions are considered to be extortionate credit transactions under section 52, subsection 2, that stated they require the corporate person to make exorbitant payments in respect of the credit provided. Any unconscionable under the principle of law relating to contracts. This is also covered in the voluntary liquidation. The liquidator has to mention whether such transactions are to be happened or not, whether he has a intent to make any such audit with respect to this preferential transactions and all that. And next one is a claim to be made to the liquidator. There are types of claimants and forms for them. They have to file that claims with the liquidator along with the supporting documents. First, the operational creditors, financial creditors, workmen or employee, or any other stakeholders. So prescribe forms for there so that they can file with the liquidator. And the verification of claims. The liquidator has bound to verify the claims which are submitted within the 30 days from the last date of receipts. That he may either admit or reject the claim according to the supporting documents which are provided by the claimant, has to verify with the books of records of the company and the supporting documents. If creditor may appeal to the adjudicating authority against the decision of the liquidator. If liquidator rejects any claim, he have an option to file an appeal with the NCLT. Next one is the list of stakeholders. The liquidator has to prepare the list of stakeholders on the basis of proof of claim submitted and accepted as per this regulation, which are covered the amount of the claim admitted. And actually we write the amount, what amount he has written and what amount is admitted, amount which are rejected, extent to which the debts are secured and unsecured is also covered, and these details of the stakeholders and proof of admission or rejection. So we prepare the list of stakeholders with this information within the 45 days from the receipt of the last date. In any other case where the company doesn't have any claimants who doesn't file the claims with the liquidator, then we have to prepare within the 15 days of the receipt of the claim only. So timeline is reduced if there is a no claims. The next one is the minutes of the consultation with the stakeholders. The stakeholder shall extend all the assistance and cooperation to the liquidator to complete the liquidation process, and such a consultation is recorded, is minutized, and will share with the shareholders after getting the undertaking from them that no undue gain from this maintain the secrecy of this.
Yeah, Umesh, there is a question though Amita has answered, whether shareholders are also required to claim the. Shareholders don't have claim, they are stakeholders. They are shareholders don't have claim, but they will get when there is any residue. So they are not to file any claim. Amita has already answered. Thanks, Amita. Yeah, Umesh, go ahead.
Now the next one is the realization of assets. In liquidation, in voluntary liquidation, realization of assets is throughout the process. The liquidator, there is no timeline for the realization. He has to continuously realize the assets. The manner of sale, the liquidator may value and sell the assets of the corporate person in a mode approved by the corporate person. So modes are available for the liquidator is to sell through e-auctions, and private sale is also there, but so these are the modes of sale available to the liquidator. And the recovery of monies due, the liquidator has endeavored to recover the realize all the assets. Say example, the trade receivables is also a part in a time bound manner for the maximization the value of the stakeholders. In realization of assets, we can say we don't have a right to write off the assets. No such a provision is still there. So liquidator has to tries the best to get the assets realized throughout this process.
And then here we can comment, I request to give comment on GST, please. On sale of assets, which was the question, earlier, that what is the.
As we, I think Umesh mentioned that there is no right available with the liquidator to write off any of the assets. If there are any refunds, we have to expedite that and ensure that all those refunds are either received or cleared in the process. Otherwise, it will add up to the overall timeline from in completing. As Dipti mentioned, the efforts which or the rights which they have to post commencement of the liquidation process are very limited, which the company may have far better rights or far other options available to get those refunds. Those need to be done prior to you initiating the process. Otherwise, it will add up to the overall timeline.
No, there was a question, what is the capital gains treatment when assets are sold in voluntary liquidation and treatment of GST? Is there any exemption is there?
So from a tax income tax perspective, whenever assets gets transferred under the liquidation, okay. Let me just take it. Let me discuss this in two parts. There are under the liquidation process, if there are any assets gets transferred to the stakeholders, okay, company is not liable to pay any tax. It is the stakeholder, which is the equity shareholders. They are required to pay tax. The tax could be either capital gains or dividend. To the extent company has accumulated profits, those gets characterized as dividend, and shareholders are required to pay dividend tax on that. To the extent the amount is paid not out of accumulated profits, then that gets taxed as capital gains. If in the process asset is so that's with regard to any surplus asset gets transferred to the stakeholders. Now, if in the process of realization, if any asset is paid, then certainly there will be tax element, and which you will have to deposit in the form of advance tax or self-assessment tax to the tax authority. Hope I have answered this question. If there is any additional question, happy to answer that. On the income tax part, I'll come to GST part separately.
Any question, or we will move to GST now?
Dipti, can I? Amita here.
Yeah, please, Amit.
So if there is no write-off of assets, one of our issue is with the DGFT, there is a duty drawback, and the asset is not more than 30,000-40,000. Can it be written off? That's a question. Because it takes a long for DGFT to clear. It may take more than 3 months now almost, and amount is just 30,000, and percentage wise it is hardly 0.01%. That is it possible? Can we write off?
Writing off right is not provided specifically.
I know, but
that's the problem.
That's the problem. Yeah. So practically, how do you?
Better you take the direction from NCLT then in that case.
For such a small amount, also we can't write off. No, as a.
That is the problem. That's why I always say that asset is real problem. That selling that liberty. That's only I was repeatedly telling that liberty we don't have. We have to check each and every balance sheet.
No, this is just a duty drawback which you come to know later.
You have to write off duty drawback earlier. Like I was telling that, before, because we ourselves cannot write off. Our duty is to realize only.
Right. Understood. I thought I'll just share. Thanks.
Yeah, the same thing I tell, because even I find many appeals and such refund and all that. So which is not then, that's why I always say them to please withdraw. Because see, then we are stuck up. We can't withdraw ourselves. The client has to withdraw before it. Any appeal for refund or whatever challenge. If there is rejection, or they are not taking it, they take years to do it, we have to hold it. We are stuck up. So purely speaking, I put the client that way. Boss, बैंक अकाउंट में कैश रखो, मैं डिस्ट्रीब्यूट करेगा.
That's not very simple. Sometimes this duty drawback is a sudden, even.
Yeah, something event will come, then we have
Correct, correct. I thought if 30,000 I can just write it off, then it will be just one.
In IBC, in insolvency, this right is given to IP.
Correct.
In
voluntary,
liquidation, it is not there.
Liquidator doesn't have. Yeah, correct. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, Mr. Vaibhav, as regards GST, you are supposed to share your knowledge.
So same is applicable for GST. So if on sale of asset there is any GST which we are recovering from the buyer, then that needs to be then deposited with the tax authorities.
Okay, fine. Okay, thanks. And you answered, if shareholder gets more than capital contribution in company, will dividend tax will attack? You said yes.
So the way it works is at first, whenever any amount is paid to shareholders, what is seen is that whatever amount we have paid, if there is any accumulated profit, then to that extent, dividend tax gets triggered. And beyond that is what gets characterized as capital gains.
Okay, thanks. Umesh, go ahead. We'll finish in another 15 minutes, friends. I know we have crossed the timeline, but another 10-15 minutes. Yeah, please.
The next one is the distribution. The liquidator has to distribute whatever he realized during the liquidation period within the 30 days from the receipts of the amount. Prior to this amendment, it was a 6 months. Now it is a 30 days. The liquidation cost comes first as per the distribution stated in the section 53 subsection 1 of the code. The liquidator may, with the approval of the corporate person, he will distribute among the stakeholders an asset that cannot be readily or advantageously sold due to its peculiar nature or other circumstances. So these assets can be given to this corporate person.
So I just have one comment on the last point which Umesh mentioned. Just be mindful of that whenever we are distributing assets. Okay, if there are any regulatory approvals required, be mindful that if we can have that approvals upfront, and especially I'm referring to any of assets being distributed to non-resident shareholders. Please look at the Indian exchange regulations to see that we are not breaching any of those requirements.
Very rightly pointed, Mr. Vaibhav. Yeah, Umesh.
Now the next one is annual status report. The liquidation process continue for more than the 12 months. Then the liquidator has to hold the meeting within the 15 days from the liquidation commencement date. Okay, if the process runs more than the 12 months, then only this annual status report is required to be prepared by the liquidator. And the meeting has to be held within the 15 days of the completion of this 12 months. The status report shall indicate the following points. First one is the settlement of list of stakeholders. Has to mention whether the liquidator has any settlement with the stakeholders. Second one is the details of the assets that has remained to be sold or realized. Distribution made to the stakeholder, distribution of unsold assets to the stakeholders, developments in a material litigations, if any there, and the filing of or development of any avoidance transactions, as we covered earlier. So these things are to be covered in the annual status report.
Sorry, there's one comment in the section. It says that dividend tax is not applicable. So what I meant was not dividend distribution tax, but the tax rate which will be applicable is of tax which applies on dividend, and capital gain tax will be applicable only on the portion which will be categorized as capital gain.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Umesh.
Now the next one is a final report. When to prepare the final report? This is the final one liquidator has to prepare. The liquidator has to endeavor to complete the process of within the timeline. Then only will prepare the final report. 270 days from the liquidation commencement date. Prior to this is a 1 year actually. Now it is a 270 days. In any other cases is a 90 days only. under this sections has to prepare this final report. That final report consists of the audit accounts of the liquidation showing the receipts and payments pertaining to the liquidation from the liquidation commencement date. And along with the statement has to be there that the assets of the corporate person has been disposed and the debt of the corporate person discharged in full, or there is a no litigation is pending, or there is a sufficient provisions has made for to meet that liquidation, that obligations arising from that pending litigations. And one sell statement is also there if any sell has made during the liquidation period. The details of that sell, that are the realized value, cost of realization, whom to be sold. So this is also to be covered in the final report.
Yeah, friends, you can see that, Umesh, go to that side. No litigation is pending against corporate person or sufficient provision. The one way ask the question because I said that you will not able to dissolve. But my friends, understand this sufficient provision. In litigation, how you will ensure this provision? Who will take care that after litigation of which, who will represent? And whether it is the company is represented properly, whether we fought properly, and their provision is sufficient. So this limbo will remain and it's a risky thing. That's why I always suggest that no pending litigation. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
The details of sales includes the manner and mode of sale also. And then explanation for the shortfall if any value realized is less than the assigned to the registered valuer. So if the sale value is less than whatever the value is given by the registered valuer, then we have to explanation to be given by the liquidator. The person to whom sold, other relevant details has to be covered in the final report. And the final submission of final report, there are three authorities to which the report has to be submitted. First one is the registrar of companies through JNL2 form. Second one is the IBBI through courier and email. We do both the things. And third one is a NCLT authority through a physical filing, along with the dissolution application and Form H. The Form H is newly introduced in the with effect in this April.
Ms. Preeti has raised the question as regard 270 days. Preeti, I mentioned that it will be prospective. So your voluntary liquidation where you are not able to finish it in 270 days, but earlier 1 year, because it is already started. Accordingly, you plan your activity, you are okay, it's okay. So you are governed by that. But year after when you will take annual thing, keep in mind that 270 days and try to finish as early. So it can't be retrospective. What I said that so far possible, you try to finish it as early as possible. Yeah, and someone has asked if no creditors, whether we can go for that is the best thing. No creditors you pay, and Amita has answered yes, you can do that.
Okay, the next one is unclaimed proceeds of liquidation. In the liquidation, if there is any unclaimed proceeds or undistributed assets, the liquidator has to apply to the adjudicating authority. We have to mention that the company, by the order to pay into the company's liquidation account that is the public account of India. If there is undistributed assets or the proceeds which are not distributed to the stakeholder as per 53(1) of the code, then that all amount to be deposited into the company's liquidation account. That account is to be operated by the IBBI. The liquidator shall, when making the payment, furnish the registrar and board the statement stating that in the nature of sums include names and last known address of the stakeholders, amount to which each entitled. That should be covered in this unclaimed proceed. Application for dissolution. This is the first application made to the NCLT. When the affairs of the company is completely wound up and assets are completely liquidated, the liquidator has to make an application to the authority NCLT, that is to dissolve the company. Once the NCLT is satisfied with the application, that is a petition filed by liquidator, on that they order the liquidate the company, and that order has to be filed with the ROC within the 14 days of the receipt of such order. And the next one is the preservation of records.
Here there was a question that somebody has, filed the final report and for 2 years no hearing has happened. Yeah, then you can't do, you have to wait. After that, no responsibility as such because all the process provided it depends on that you have sold all assets, no liability, no pending inquiry, anything, and everything is done, and then you have filed, then you have nothing to do. Yeah, please go ahead.
Preservation of records, as stated in the regulations.
Sorry, Umesh, there is another question. When this will trigger unclaimed process? Unclaimed process means when you distribute it within timeline to every stakeholders, but there is some thing which is unclaimed. There are shareholders who are not traceable and as such, so that proceed which is not distributed to that shareholder will go to the IBBM, to the government in the sense, because we can't keep it. Who will take that? So that will go to unclaimed. So that is a final distribution when you are doing final distribution. Yeah, Umesh.
The next one is the preservation of records. One of the important thing, the liquidator's duty is to preserve the records. He has to preserve through physically or an electronic copy of the reports, all the things, registers, books of accounts for the period of 8 years after the dissolution of the corporate person, either with himself or with the information utility. So this 8 years starts from the when the liquidator got the dissolution order from the NCLT. And next one is the liquidation estate. The liquidation estate is in the domain with the liquidator. The liquidator has to form a liquidation estate, which are the estate is he has to hold in the fiduciary position for the benefit of all the stakeholders. That shall comprise the following things. First,
I think, Umesh, you can skip this list because it is there, because we are running short of time now. Yeah, exclusion you read, that's all.
okay, ma'am. The exclusion from the liquidation estate is the third party assets which are in the possession of the corporate person, assets of the trust, bailment contracts, provident fund, pension fund, and gratuity. These are the assets of the employees and the workmen. Third one is the right to use assets, when we have only exclusive right to use the assets, not the ownership rights. Personal assets of the any stakeholder or any shareholder, assets of the subsidiary, assets that's subject to the set of any other prescribed by the board. So these are should not included in the.
I think we can skip this powers and duties and liquidator and all that, because the content was voluntary liquidation, and you can straightway go quickly in 2 minutes all decided cases in one line, if you can say. These are the forms and all that.
Okay.
Friends, you want to continue 2-3 decided cases for 2 minutes if you are permitting?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
2-3 cases, just 2-3 minutes only. Okay, yeah. Yeah, Umesh.
Okay, the first case is in the matter of the Central Inland Water Transport Corporation Limited and the liquidator. This is basically a company of government company, which is held by the shipping company, Shipping India. I have some basic, the company is in the process of the shipping, building shipping and repairing of the ships and all that. The corporate person has a lot of litigation, pending litigations and claims against the debtor, which are exceeds the value of assets. When the liabilities are exceeding the assets, hence the liquidator filed a application under section 42 of the code. The liquidator prays for the suspension of this liquidation and conversion it into the section 271 of the Companies Act. That is the compulsory winding up of corporate person. So the NCLT judgment is that the NCLT in his judgment passed the suspension of the voluntary liquidation, and the second prayer was for 271 was rejected by the NCLT, stating that there is other option available in section 10 and section 7 or something.
Yeah.
This is only the first case law, and the second one is a disciplinary committee that passed in the matter of the Viber Media Private Limited. Actually, in this case, what happened? Public announcement should be made within the 5 days, but in this case, is public announcement made after delay of the 18 months. And second one, in MGI Group India Private Limited, the same thing happened. The public announcement was made on delayed of approx 8 months. So So in MGI India, another thing is that the liquidator appointed the Deloitte and Haskins, who are providing the audit service to the CD before the commencement of the voluntary liquidation. So as per regulation, there is a auditor should not be continue under the voluntary liquidation. So IBBI, the disciplinary committee passed the order against the liquidator to file a penalty of the 1 lakh rupees, and after depositing, this should be continued as a liquidator. In another case law, where the insolvency professional accepted the assignment as a voluntary liquidator after the 31st December 19 without holding the valid authorization for assignments. The submission made by the IP is that the assignment for voluntary winding up was accepted before the 31st December. As per regulation 7A of the IP regulation, it is clearly mentioned that it should not apply for the assignment which our insolvency professional is undertaking on 31st December 19. He further stated that the appointment and acceptance are two different things, merely on subsequent of the approval by the shareholders and as on later date, which is after the 31st December. It cannot be construed that the assignment was accepted from the shareholders' approval. These are the submissions made by the IP. Further, he stated that the acceptance signifying is the consent by the IP to act as a liquidator for the assignment, which is proposed, and the preliminary work in respect of such things are to be carried out. And he also mentioned that the offer, acceptance, appointment, execution, conclusion, these are the two different things as per the regulation 7A of the IP regulations. The disciplinary committee in this case does not pass any order against him, just disposed of this case. And the last case law is that the IP insolvency professional was appointed as a liquidator in the 6 companies. These 6 companies are under the voluntary liquidation handled by the single IP. The contribution made is the invoices or fees charged by the IP in the firm's name, not actually in his name. The submission stated by the IP is that that circular was notified, but they missed to consider this notification. So in this case, IBBI ordered that pre-registration educational course should be go into for the IP and pay the penalty equal to the 10% of the fees. And IP shall not accept new assignment before this completion of this pre-registration educational course and procedure of evidence for the payment of the deposit to the board. These are the certain case laws which are covered under this voluntary liquidation.
That's over, Umesh?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, Umesh. Sorry, friends, little bit we extended the timeline, but since we had a question, queries, I thanks all of you, Amita, you for participating, all others, Preeti and others who raised the questions and we participated, Mr. Ashish who shared his experience, and of course, Mr. Vaibhav for your time and valuable inputs on taxation aspect, which we were also very keen to know. And thanks a lot for your time, Mr. Vaibhav. We will invite.
Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thanks all. Thanks everyone. And we'll meet after next 15 days again. Thank you. And the notification will be sent to you all, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.